What are the best Yu-Gi-Oh decks post YCS Niagara? Big Dog, Rage of the Abyss has done so much for this Yu-Gi-Oh format, and today, Big Dog, I'm gonna be ranking some of your most favorite and popular Yu-Gi-Oh decks, all the way from the best deck to try a YCS at home. It's gonna be crazy, dog. It's gonna be fun, but more importantly, you're gonna get a lot of insight. So let's go ahead and jump on in. What's going on with y'all, Big Dog? And it is an amazing day for Yu-Gi-Oh! I hope that your day phenomenal. But if it isn't, don't let what happened at the beginning of your day ruin the rest of your day. Rage of the Abyss has turned the entire Yu-Gi-Oh meta on its head. And now that we're in an entirely new format, players are going to be experimenting with different strategies and different cards. And this particular tier list, Big Dog, is going to help you on your journey to discover a particular deck or give you some clarification on how strong a particular deck is. But before we get into it, criteria. We got to talk about the criteria, Big Dog. In today's tier list, I will be ranking these strategies based on how strong they are, and I've included just about every single Yu-Gi-Oh strategy that topped over the weekend. Actually, I forgot a deck. Now I think we have every deck. The second thing for this criteria, which I think is really important, is foresight. At the beginning of every single Yu-Gi-Oh format, the decks are a little bit more diverse. And as you guys know, once the format gets figured out, strategies start to revolve around these really popular cards. So I think that it's really important that we celebrate these strategies that top, but at the same time, bring in context. Big Dogs, I really do look forward to the new strategies that we can play inside of Rage of the Abyss. And I can't wait to update you guys when we get new information about Yu-Gi-Oh strategies. Let's go ahead and start this whole thing off with Centurion. It took a century for Centurion to put its 2 cents into the meta. I know, comedian, that's me. Is the Centurion hype real? Centurion is a really good Yu-Gi-Oh deck that got support inside of Rage of the Abyss. 2 new cards, a synchro monster that gives the deck a lot more pliability, and an additional monster, which the monster is kind of optional, but I still think is pretty solid. In theory, I do think that this deck is solid, and it's in a really good spot. Being able to banish important dark monsters in the graveyard allows you to check strategies like Yubel. But then on the other hand, it's like, how important is Yubel into the format? I think it's time that we stop giving Centurion the benefit of the doubt and just clearly say it's one of the better decks inside of the format. I don't expect Centurion to run rampant, but it does have the characteristics of being a very powerful Yu-Gi-Oh strategy. Unfair cards like Shooting Quasar Dragon, that's not the dragon, is it? Star Blazar Dragon? That's not even a dragon. Cosmic Blazar Dragon. And also being able to use the bestial monsters like Swarm to synchro summon on your opponent's turn, this deck has layers and can be played in multiple different decks. I think that it's a very solid strategy, but a deck that's almost beyond solid. Chat, we had like 2 weeks of no Snake Eyes, and here we are talking about Snake Eyes. While Centurion did secure a top seat in a YCS and then a couple of seats over the course of the weekend, Snake Eyes went from no decks into certain top cuts to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now, I don't think that it's that far ahead. I think that players have really gamed up on this deck, and while it is the best deck, I think that the numbers will start to balance itself out a little bit more. What's been really interesting about Snake Eyes Azamina is that you don't need to play the Fiendsmith engine at all. Some players have been dropping the Fiendsmith engine and just playing Snake Eyes Azamina, while other players have been playing all 3 engines and have ironically had the exact equal amount of success. And I think this is a good thing for broke players that love Fiend cards, because now Fiendsmith is just a little bit cheaper, like I said it would be. Runic Stun, the other side of the equation here. Now chat, if you live long enough as a hero, you get to see yourself become a villain. And some of my favorite heroes of all time have become villains. The Joker, my favorite hero. Now all of a sudden he's a villain. Oh, he blew up a hospital. He gives people laughing gas. He's a hero to me. He made people laugh. Runic Stun seems to be a deck that can do fairly well at lower levels of competition, but seems to struggle when it comes to the higher levels of competition. I think it's one of those strategies that can compete, and just like the Joker, it is one crazy ass Yu-Gi-Oh deck. Crazy as in, you would really have to be a sociopath to take this to an event and expecting to get friends. I just want to talk if you play this deck consistently, dog. That's all, you know. Runic Stun does have a few things going for it. It's completely immune to cards like Molchummy Flowers, and it's incredibly cheap, but you're not doing anyone any favors by playing this deck. It's also pretty fragile against good players. Branded, or as some people like to say, brain dead. Like seriously, can we give up that moniker? This deck is actually hard to play now. I like to use a TJ meter. If he can actually play the deck flawlessly by picking it up, it's a brain dead deck. TJ still can't play Branded. He's been playing it since it came out. I think that Branded is another strategy that can compete, and I don't think it actually topped over this weekend. But here's the thing about Branded players. One, they never give up. Two, the deck will always find a way. I would be incredibly surprised to see if Branded does not top a major event throughout this format. It would actually be alarming. The Branded Fusion hit really doesn't mean anything, and from a local to a regional level, this will still probably be one of the best decks to play, especially if you broke. Now, Chimera is utterly disappointing. The deck got a new Fiendsmith toy to play with, but only topped one event. Chimera, this was your opportunity to come and take the world by storm. You are already one of the most versatile decks and one of the best strategies to be able to incorporate Fiendsmiths, and then you fall flat on your face. But to be fair, one of the biggest reasons why Chimera isn't as powerful in this format as the last is Molchummy Flowers. This card summons out the extra deck more than Yu-Gi-Oh players take baths, and that, well, I guess that's not really a hard accomplishment. They summon a lot though. I still think that this deck is a pretty viable strategy, which is why I'm putting it in can compete. But I think that a lot of the cards that players are going to start using is going to be really counterproductive for this. Not only is Molchummy Flowers really good, but so is Retaliating Sea. And those are problems that players just don't want to deal with. It's one of those situations where the counter to some of the best decks is also a really good counter against you. And I know a lot of rogue enthusiasts that don't want to deal with none of that. Tenpai Dragon. Tenpai Dragon came up shorter than Kendrick Lamar asking for uppies on his girlfriend. Tenpai Dragon has been disappointing as football players with both parents and still fail to make it big. Tenpai Dragon has been more disappointing than going through your wife's Amazon account. Don't do it. You'll be disappointed. And somehow, some way, this deck still finds a way to be one of the next best Yu-Gi-Oh decks. I still think it's incredibly foolish to put Tenpai Dragon lower than next best. The deck is still good at what it does, which is finishing games incredibly fast. One of the biggest problems with this deck though is the field spell, meaning that it's more susceptible to hand traps. But the problem is, people are starting to play a little bit less hand traps, which makes this deck a lot less vulnerable. Tearlaments took first place at a German Open. Master Duel players are having nightmares right now. No guys, Tearlaments is not a tier 1 deck in the TCG. It's one of those strategies that takes a good pilot and rewards you for strong effort. For the people that are crying over Tearlaments being practically dead in Master Duel, you can come over and play Tearlaments in the TCG, and if you spent that many hours on the deck in Master Duel, you should be one of those good pilots that can make this work. I also think that Sprite is one of those disappointing decks. It did well at YCS Lily, but didn't do anything anywhere else. It's takes a good pilot. I wouldn't completely give up on this deck just yet if you're playing it, but my eyebrows would start furrowing at our opponent using Flowers on us. The benefit is just play more Sprite Red and hope to God you can draw him first. Plant Link. Bro, Plant Link is this is the lowest I can give it, dog. It's the lowest I can give it. From what we've been seeing, Plant Link is just one of those sneaky Yu-Gi-Oh decks that does have the unfair cards that takes a good pilot. It also has the credentials to make it above can compete. Another YCS top under its belt. I think that it has a dedicated but small fan base, and if you jump onto this strategy, you're not gonna regret it. It's solid. Now, as for Ritual Beast, this deck didn't do as well as we would expect, but I also think that Ritual Beast has some of the same requirements as the Plant player, a deck that has a very dedicated fan base, but actually did get better from the ban list. Getting both Archnemesis Protoss and Thunder Dragon Colossus is actually insane, because it doesn't matter how many times your opponent can draw off of Flowers if they can't summon the attribute of their deck. Brilliant gameplay. Best shifter deck, right? Fire King has solidified itself as one of the best decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! Again. And it just wasn't Oconics that made this deck incredible. It's the fact that the Fire King Snake Eyes combo still exists, and now you can sprinkle in the Azamita to be able to make sure that your negations stay negations. On the other side though, if you guys are just barely getting into the game, or maybe just never invested into Snake Eyes, I don't think it's worth it. This deck is like $1,300, chat. 13. I'm not sure how many events that you can win between now and the deck becomes almost nothing that would make the strategy get your money back. It's a risky gamble. Now, Solomon Great. Bro, this deck just don't die. Solomon Great topping a regional makes me put it into takes a good pilot. I think it's really hard pressed to put this deck anything above. It didn't get anything to make it stronger, but it is not a weak Yu-Gi-Oh deck. kind of like these other 3 decks right here. And again, what separates these 3 decks on the bottom and these 3 on the top is that these decks have really unfair broken cards and requires a good pilot. These decks don't really have any busted Yu-Gi-Oh cards, though are still really good if you can skillfully play them. Whitewoods have also been making rounds around the format, and players have moved over Runic Whitewoods and have been playing more Centurion, Toy Box, and Fiendsmith variants. I have seen this deck play, no hand traps. And to be honest with you, this deck cook. Like I should have said in the beginning of the video, we're not gonna go solely off of tops. We're gonna go off of the strength of these Yu-Gi-Oh decks, and I think that this deck is one of the next best. Unfair cards like being able to synchro summon on your opponent's turn and flip their monsters face down, but also gaining your spell and trap cards back when they're being sent to the graveyard. I think that the Whitewoods deck has a lot of great things going for it. It's probably, and hear me out, it's probably the best of the 3 synchro decks. Genuinely. Now I'm gonna do a little bit more testing and a lot more research before I crown it, but yeah, it's pretty good. Yubel though. Despite Yubel showing shortcomings, it went from one of the most represented decks in the game to 2nd place at best. I still would put it in the best deck status. Now, to be honest with you guys, right now, it would go you, a decent size gap, then you, like right here or something, right here. Then from there, these decks can be able to beat these decks, and the best thing about it is that these decks are actually pretty damn good against Yubel. So yes, while Yubel is still considered one of the best decks in the game, there are more ways to counter Yubel than there is to counter Snake Eyes Azamina and Snake Eyes Fire King Azamina and the Fiendsmith cards that come with it. I think that a lot of people are playing the game where these decks are better than this deck, and these decks have less counters that are being played in this deck. So the popularity of this deck has fallen off, but it's still pretty good. Flew under East. Bro, try that YCS at home. Do not play Flew under East and expect to win anything now. Nah, but in all seriousness, Harpy's Featherstorm is still a card, so it's not a terrible Yu-Gi-Oh deck. But if you're going to like the high levels events with your Flu deck, flew yourself home. Now, Mementos, in my opinion, has been one of the most disappointing Yu-Gi-Oh strategies. I still think that it's incredibly good, but some of the reasons why this deck is plagued is some of the reasons why Chimera is plagued. The biggest thing is that players are playing counters like Retaliating Sea like that, and nobody ain't trying to deal with that. I'm gonna put it in can beat. Memento is still a solid Yu-Gi-Oh deck, and with the new Acheron monster, I don't even think you need the Fiendsmith engine. But I also think because the format is fairly new, players haven't discovered that just yet, which could lead to players playing this strategy less, which also could justify why these strategies weren't more represented. But that could also be coping, because you know I'm a coper. Next is going to be Infernoid for my Master Duel players coming to the TCG. No. Same thing with Lightsworn, my boy. No. Bro, that ship has sailed. Like, sail. These decks are just not viable Yu-Gi-Oh decks at the highest level of competition. Not terrible Yu-Gi-Oh decks, but what they share in common is that they're really focused on being able to mill the correct cards, and that's one of those aspects that aren't controllable. When that becomes controllable, Tearlament probably becomes the best deck. Now, Pearly, my boy, is a strategy that did get hit on 2 sides. I think I'm gonna put it in Takes a Good Pilot, mainly because it still can make Noir. But the problem with making Noir is that that doesn't seem like it does enough right now. Pearly is still one of the better budget decks in Yu-Gi-Oh, but we're in a Yu-Gi-Oh format where Noir feels fair. I don't know what to say about that. Paleozoic, I gotta go ahead and eat crow here. This may be the Eat Crow Cali tier list, because yeah, that I put it too high. That deck's no. People mentioned to me that Reasoning was still limited to 1, and I was like, oh, yeah, I forgot about that. Sky Strikers getting 2nd place at YCS. This is tough, because Sky Strikers, I don't think we've ever said they were a bad deck. Mainly because I don't want Sky Striker players to dox me, and also because the FBI can't come fast enough. But I think the instance of Sky Strikers getting 2nd place was an incredible Yu-Gi-Oh player. He's actually really good. Playing a deck that he's incredibly good at. It doesn't really have any broken cards. It's a solid Yu-Gi-Oh deck. I'm gonna put it in Takes a Good Pilot, despite it happening. Now, if Sky Striker starts topping on a consistent basis, we might have to look into some things. But I don't really see anything that makes Sky Striker above these Yu-Gi-Oh decks. And to be honest, I think Sky Striker right here kind of exemplifies how all of these decks are still being able to compete right now. It's just so much more dependent on the pilot the lower you go, except for you. You don't depend on anything. If anything, you depend on how bad the other player is. But I think right now in this format, just about every single one of these decks in the rows 4 and up can compete. And even the lower rows at a local level, possibly even a regional level, they'll do okay. Kashtira has no broken cards. A Rice Heart's still banned. We're gonna put this in Takes a Good Pilot. Solid Yu-Gi-Oh deck that was doing decently well, and I expect it to do decently well into the format. But its inconsistencies will often show up, meaning that I don't think it'll do anything major over the format. Now, Rescue Ace. Bro, I ain't gonna lie. I think that Rescue Ace secretly, guys. Bold take. Boom. Allow me to explain. Is Rescue Ace on paper stronger than Azamina Snake Eyes? Fuck no. But Rescue Ace can still set up negations through Mulchummy Forest. It doesn't need to go into the extra deck. Rescue Ace also doesn't completely lose the shifter. It got some immunities here and there. I think oftentimes when we go into Yu-Gi-Oh, we have to look at how powerful the strategy is versus how powerful the strategy is against things that are pushing back against us. And if you were to ask me, I think that Rescue Ace is the best in that situation. And I think it's the better deck to pick if you are going against nothing but Rogue. But if we're playing like straight up, nah. Get your ass back here, buddy. Labyrinth, my boys. Bold take. I think that Labyrinth is, I think that Labyrinth's really good. Chat, it took me a while because y'all know I'm slow as fuck, right? But I figured out simultaneous equation cannons, and I never took anything past pre-algebra. My teachers told me without algebra, I'll be a loser in life. But look at me now. I got Yu-Gi-Oh cards, I got women, my gram, and my sister, and I'm not drowning in my student loans just yet. We cooking, boys. Labyrinth has Simultaneous Equation Cannon, a card that can banish all of your opponent's cards on the field. All you have to do is figure out how to use it. To be honest, I know people that actually know algebra and don't know how to do the card. But I think there's two secret things about this deck. One, Dominus Purge is crazy good right now, and this deck plays it best. Two, Mulchummy Forest and cards like Retaliating Sea are also good, which do not phase this deck. It's one of those situations like what I said about Rescue Ace. It's really good going against a lot of the cards that people are playing. And while it may not be as strong as the best Yu-Gi-Oh decks, it does have a lot of unfair situations. Dinomorphia got a top, and I think one of the biggest things about Dinomorphia is that if Yubel is played less, this deck becomes a lot better. But I'm still gonna go ahead and say Dinomorphia Takes a Good Pilot. Rexstrom ain't busted no more. It's weird that I have Solomon Great here twice, so I'm just gonna go ahead and move it to the back. And let's talk about Voiceless Voice. I think with the lack of Bestials, Voiceless may be okay. Seriously, once this deck ball starts rolling, it's crazy. And you can even play engines like the Azamina engine to make your deck even more stable. I'm gonna go ahead and put Voiceless Voice in Can Compete. I'm convinced that this strategy is a little bit stronger than what people are giving credit. One of the few decks that can make multiple enemy negates. I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see it in next best. Actually, nah, I can't do that. I'm gonna put it there. And lastly, the strategy I almost forgot. Exodia. Chat, y'all said I was coping when I said Exodia is one of the best decks. Y'all said I was coping, but you didn't know that I be knowing, chat. I be knowing. Exodia getting Millennium Unk is one of the best things to happen to it. Makes the deck a lot more consistent, but I still think it's one of those strategies that just simply can compete. And I just want to point out, none of these strategies are in order. Just the top row. I would still like to see more from Exodia before I can give it a higher rank, but the deck does have the necessary tools to be one of the better decks inside of Yu-Gi-Oh right now. And that's all that I have for my meta tier list post YCS Niagara and events alike. I want you guys to let me know, was there a particular strategy that I ranked too high, too low, or what were some strategies that I missed? Of course, if you want to see more amazing content, you guys already know what to do. Go ahead and check out these videos so I can catch you on the next one.